everyone. My name is John Toews. I'm the event coordinator at McNally Robinson Booksellers, and it's a huge pleasure to be involved in this evening. I can't see you all in person, but it is delightful to see the names accumulate on the side of the screen, and it's just good to know that we're all sharing, even if most of us are hidden in various rooms across the country at the moment. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that although we are coming together from places across this country, these lands are the traditional territories of many First Peoples, and even within the virtual realm, we're all treaty people with an obligation to work towards reconciliation. Part of that, for me, is to make this acknowledgement. Lauren, Ariel, and I are based in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This is a particularly special event in that it's the 10th and final event in the spring edition of the Pandemic Response Reading Series, organized by the inexhaustibly incredible Lauren Carter. One thing I should mention is that putting on a series like this is naturally rather monetarily expensive, so if you do have an opportunity to visit the Pandemic Response Reading Series website and donate a little bit of money, that would always be very much appreciated. I'll also point out at the beginning of the event that we love hearing everything that you have to say in the chat on the side, but unless your name is Sue Sorensen and you've already done your homework and sent in an incredible list of questions for Lauren to answer, we'd ask that you keep all of your questions in the Q&A screen, which you can access from the bottom of your screen, right down there. Appropriately enough, Lauren's work in the literary world has recently been acknowledged in any number of ways, so we're closing out the series for the spring with a discussion about her work. Particularly centered on This Has Nothing to Do with You, her novel from Freehand Books. We've already seen a picture of a very large dog, so hopefully there will be quite a bit of conversation around Gromit the dog, the canine that lurks within its pages. This evening is hosted by the insightful and intimidating Ariel Gordon, who has also recently been acknowledged as Ms. Sassy Winnipeg 2020. Ariel is also the author of Treed, Walking in Canada's Urban Forests. Ariel and her sister, visual artist Natalie Baird, will be launching the spring issue of their Draw Write project, Pandemic Papers, in July 2020 with the good folks at Bay Press. Ariel's next book is the long/found poem, Tree Talk, which will be published in fall 2020. But now I'll be back later on to help host the questions, but until then, please join me wherever you are in loudly applauding and backing away for safety while you acknowledge Ariel Gordon.
That was terrible. But thank you. Remind me to punch you when we're next in the same room. So I am so pleased to be here. I'm inviting you into my bedroom because that's the best place to host these things because the rest of my dirty family are not here. So we're here to celebrate the work of Lauren Carter. And that's the literary work, that's the creative work, but then that's also the hard work of being Lauren Carter, especially this spring. But first of all, I want to inaugurate the chat. I want to make sure that we're all here, we're all engaging, because the chat is where the most fun is. It's like standing at the back of the room and saying all those snarky / fun things at a reading. And that's my favorite part of a reading is the chat. So I'm relying on you, audience, to make this fun, because I certainly am not going to make it fun. I mean, I'll try, but I'm relying on you. Okay, so my first question to test out the chat is, are you a dog or a cat person? And if you swing both ways, you can note that too. So I want to see the chat right now, people talking. Cat, cat, cat. Okay, we're seeing both from Sean Patterson. Oh, okay. See, that's good. We're all chiming in. Neither. Oh, I like that. So, Bob, are you into ferrets or birds? I know there's more options than just that. All right. So we've got a variety. Dat. No, I said cat. Oh. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for chiming in. I see we're split. It's everything. It's everything and nothing. So that worked. All right, so what you need to know about Lauren and what you need to know about this book. Now, we promised today that we talk about rescue dogs, writing community, empathy, and family discussion. And family dysfunction, not family discussion, although we will be discussing family. But I need to tell you about Lauren first. Now, during the pandemic in particular, Lauren has been busy running this pandemic response reading series. There have been 10 events featuring 15 books, 15 authors, 10 events, 15 authors. And these are books that would not have gotten launched otherwise. People whose all their spring events had been canceled because of the pandemic. So she hosted all these great events. And then there was also an additional event around Black Lives Matter this past weekend, which looked amazing. She's also been doing this thing called the Write Ramble. And it's a Facebook group, and every day she has been live streaming writing sessions, every day at 10. And that's been a great thing. So, you know, it's a chance to take 20 minutes every day and write to a prompt. And I think that's been a really good thing for a lot of people during the pandemic. Now, Lauren also does coaching and manuscript consultation, and this is her 4th book. Well, she's the author of 4 books, sorry. So she's got 2 novels and 2 books of poetry. Her debut novel was Swarm, which was sort of a post-apocalyptic novel, or during it was apocalyptic, let's just say that. And it was longlisted for the CBC Canada Reads. She also has her past poetry collection, Lichen Bright, and Following Sea, which I understand came out the same year as This Has Nothing to Do with You. And so, according to her bio, which I printed out because I am a dedicated host, she's also the past winner of the Prairie Fire Fiction Contest, the Room Magazine Poetry Prize, and has been longlisted multiple times for the CBC Literary Prizes. Now, Lauren's been a Manitoban for a number of years. Over the last couple of years, she moved to a country house just outside Winnipeg. Yeah, so the most important thing, and the reason we're gathering beyond our enormous gratitude, is because this book, which John held up, called This Has Nothing to Do with You, actually won 2 awards at the Manitoba Book Awards. So it got the very the Margaret Laurence Award for Fiction, for which there were 5 amazing books, and she took it, and it was well deserved. And then she was also recognized for the John Hirsch Award for Most Promising Manitoba Writer. Now, I have the great good fortune of having won that award. And so what I'd like to do is welcome her now to the Most Promising Club. We have meetings where we get together and cry about our royalties. So it's a very distinguished club. So what I'm going to do is, now that I've introduced her badly and scatteredly, is I'm going to bring Lauren on, and we're going to chat a bit. There's going to be some questions back and forth, and then she's going to read, and then more chatting, and then another reading, and then John will come back and moderate the questions from the Q&A. And I'm looking at the Q&A, and there are no questions written there. I'm a little disappointed. So I'm just saying, you better add something there. Hey, Lauren.
Thank you, Ariel, for that. And I'm really happy to know that there's a club where we can get together and cry over our book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have gin and tonics. Can we have gin and tonics? Fancy. I bought pineapple thyme today to put into my garden, and it is the most incredible thing ever. It's thyme, but it's fragrance of pineapples. So we can muddle that into our G&Ts.
Now, I'm happy to muddle with you anytime. Now, some people get Lauren and I confused. They think that we are siblings, right? So some people, I think it's mostly that we both are wearing glasses, and we have hair, and we're white. And we're both like sort of loud.
And we're middle-aged.
Yeah,
and middle-aged women
middle-aged, old, white, and have hair. So, but
we have a comedy routine, but we should start a podcast.
We should.
This is amazing.
Well, And I like to think of you as my conjoined twin.
Look at, if we go like this, we're sort of conjoined. Okay.
Yeah, see?
Okay.
We're joined. Here, put your head to the edge of your screen.
This side?
No, the other side. Look, our heads are conjoined. I'm sorry, that was terrible.
I can hear my husband laugh. You can probably hear him laughing.
I can't. Tell him to get louder.
Oh, he's laughing pretty loud.
Okay. So the first question, we started with a dog-cat poll. I'm so a cat person, and you're so a dog person. And so I know you're not supposed to ask biographical questions of authors about their fiction.
Yes.
But is Gromit based on Mowat, your devil dog?
Gromit is based on Mowat. He's also based on Oliver, our past dog. The moment in the book when Gromit eats Mel's couch is based on a true story that actually happened to us. Oliver, our past dog, ate our couch for the same reasons. So yeah, it was, but Gromit definitely came to life when Mowat came into my life and became this insane dog who would jump into the neighbor's pool and I'd have to rescue him from near drowning, and he would take off, and Jason would spend his mornings before going to work chasing him down the river, trying to get him back from scavenging frozen fish up in the paw.
My favorite Gromit story is how he blew out both of his knees and cost you the same as a car.
Mowat. Yeah. And I did actually write a short story with a dog that has that knee surgery, and it ended up in the Fiddlehead. After 20 years of trying to publish in the Fiddlehead, finally.
So all you have to do is mine your dog stories, and you will have a full and enriching literary career.
Yes, for sure. It's working so far.
Yeah. So I guess I don't think I would describe Mowat and or the previous dog, whose name I've already forgotten. Oliver. As inspirations, more like sort of bad examples. Okay, so you had this story. I'm assuming that you had the bones of the story you want to tell. Did the dog arrive first? Did the dog arrive second? Because the dog is a really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like a literal dog in her life, but it's an interesting metaphor for how we are broken and recover.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, totally. And I didn't plan that. What happened is I wanted to give Mel a kind of interesting job, right? So I decided that she would volunteer at the animal shelter, and Gromit came from that, and that whole motif, that whole symbolic unfolding of her learning how to give care to someone came out of wanting to, because so often I'm writing and someone's having tea and everything's so ordinary and boring, and I wanted to turn it and, okay, let's put her in an animal shelter. Let's try that out. And at the time I was doing a lot of dog rescue stuff, fostering dogs up in the paw. So, and trying to learn how to train a dog, because Mowat needed training and there wasn't a dog trainer up there. And
he's trained?
If he wasn't trained, he would be a complete nightmare, that dog. He is trained. He is trained. He's crate trained. He loves his crate. He spends time in his crate. My sister's laughing. I can see her.
I was going to ask, did you train him to put his nose in my groin every time I come over?
Yeah, that's all him. Yeah, so I put a lot of that dog training material into the book, of course.
Yes.
Stuff I was learning.
Yes. Well, and in some ways, the dog forces her to reach out to other people for help because it's a bigger problem than she can deal with. Right?
Absolutely.
And that doesn't come easy to her. Like she doesn't want to be noticed. She doesn't want to exist. She's just really barely getting by at that point.
Yeah. It's almost like she grabs on to Gromit because out of desperation, right? That she has to make some move. And so, okay, I'm going to do what I've known, which is this love of animals, because she wants to be a vet, and that was all derailed. So he's becomes like, he's her, like, you know, leap off the cliff kind of thing. So
now I realize that we've gone in without actually describing the book. So can you give me the elevator synopsis? If you were pitching this to an agent who was going to adapt it as a movie, what would you say?
Well, I always say that it's a story about a brother and sister coming to terms with the fact that their mother has murdered their father and his mistress. And that's not giving anything away, because, you know, the murder happens on the acknowledgement of the murder happens right at the beginning of the book. So, and I think, you know, really the central story is not Gromit. He just helps to tell the story, really. So yeah, but it's just, you know, it's a novel about trauma. It's a novel about overcoming past trauma, moving through trauma, figuring out how we take care of ourselves and each other. Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing is that in a lot of books, it's the main character that does the thing that has to be grown past or atoned for. And in many ways, this character has done nothing, right? She's a survivor of it. But she's also been ignored / protected by her family since the very beginning, since long before the tragedy that changed their lives. And so that's a really interesting character to explore. Like, she makes tons of bad decisions, but she's not really an actor in this story. So what was that like as a fictionista to explore, to work with that kind of character?
That is a good question. Wow. I think it's just kind of the same with Sandy, right? Like Sandy in Swarm, sorry. Sandy is ricocheting a lot off other people's decisions. So I think I just kind of like writing about people who are buffeted by other people's bad choices and life decisions. I don't know. But I did have so much fun, like putting Mel into constant bad scenarios and, like prodding her into making one inappropriate choice after another. I just found that was really the center of her journey, was trying to figure out how to be good to herself, how to take care of herself. And that is a thing I think that really does happen after trauma. Like you're trying so hard to keep stuff together, but you just keep making the wrong choices. And
Mel goes and lives in a cave. So
yeah,
I mean, that's a pretty like, extreme. It's a really interesting choice, right? Because like, not only does she go to a hippie commune, but the hippie commune is too much. So she goes and lives in the cave. And one of Sue Sorensen's brilliant questions I'm going to ask and attribute to her, even though she told me I didn't have to.
Yes.
But that would be like hosting plagiarism. So I'm not going to do it. So her question is, Mel does some pretty wild things like living in a cave. Did your editor query the likelihood or realism of any part of Mel's lively journey? Or did your editor want even more offbeat adventure?
No, there was never a question. There, in the beginning, there was a suggestion from one of the publishers who was interested in the book, and it was actually kind of a big publisher. They wanted me to cut all that part out. They wanted me to remove all the BC and the Southern States stuff, and I was just like, no.
My favorite is the guy whose cave it is, who speaks only in rhyme.
Robert, yes.
Yeah. Is there a real life iteration of Robert? And if so, can I meet him?
Well, Robert was, so a lot of that material is pulled from actual experiences that I had. Robert was an amalgamation of two old guys that I met in the early 90s when I was traveling in the States after Jerry Garcia died, which was, you know, kind of just happenstance, but it makes the story that much better. So I did meet this old hippie guy who talked in rhyme, and then I met the character that Robert is based on, who was squatting by Oak Creek in Sedona, and he did offer me his cave.
I feel like that's a euphemism.
Yeah.
Would you like my cave? Would you like to come into my cave?
He showed me the cave. He said, you can stay here if you like in the cave. And I said, of course I said, yeah, I will stay in the cave. And then later, I can't remember how much later, he told me I have to retract my offer of the cave because I forgot that I promised it to this other woman. So material, right? Like, there's my mom, like, losing her mind at what is my daughter doing? Like, is she gonna make it out of this time in her life and come home? And yeah, I'm like gathering material.
Well, which your mom should understand because she's an artist as well.
Yes, which she absolutely understands. She never ever told, like, she let me do stuff. Not that I was in my 20s, but
yeah. But what kind of example did she set for you as an artist? Do you know what I mean? Were there lessons? See, and I spent most of my early 20s looking for mentors, looking for artistic mentors, looking for examples of women that had done this thing that I wanted to do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You had that at home.
I did, but I had it later. Like, I had it because my mom started painting after her car accident, right, in the early 80s. So I did have it. I'm sure it definitely influenced me, like observing her focus, I think, observing her, because she taught herself how to paint. So observing that kind of attention to the craft, I think, was a big lesson. Yeah. And
so she did the painting that is on the cover of your poetry collection, Following Sea. Do you have it? Hold it up.
Yeah, let me just grab it. It's in a pile over here.
Now, I understand that's a painting of you. Did you model for that?
I did.
Were you that hot when you were modeling?
I was, but who knew, right? Like,
now you look like me, sadly.
You're like, I'm fat. No. So
you're lucky enough to look exactly like me. But okay, so you maybe didn't provide an example that, you know, that you can go, oh, this and this and this. Like, obviously the focus and the attention to craft and being self-taught. But at least she provided you with book covers and paintings. Like, how many paintings?
Yeah, and my mom, okay, yeah. Even from a young age, she would, like, so I started writing when I was really little, like in the form of telling her stories. And so she would write the stories down. And they were kind of narrative arcs, like they had a narrative arc. And so she started giving me notebooks and pens and books and reading. Her and my brother would give me a lot too, a lot of Christmas books. And so definite encouragement. Like, I was like, you're the writer from the age of like 4. So definitely that. And my uncle, my mom's brother, was a writer. So I got a lot of modeling and encourage. He was the guy who taught me about the writers market. Yeah. And
like those books, they used to be like this thick.
Yeah.
With like a list of every literary journal in the country.
Yeah, and how to send stuff out, you know, with your.
Now, did you use some of his work? Did you reference some of his work in Following Sea? Yeah?
I did, yeah. From one of his poems, there's an epigraph in here. Yeah. I swim toward you in a stream that carries a hook of memory, bait of flung down years, its color singing.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, he was a really good poet, and he wrote a book about, he walked the Mormon Trail. So starting in, I always forget the state where that starts, Illinois maybe. He walked it all the way to Utah, and then he wrote a book about it called Following the Wrong God Home,
which you were just scanning the shelves for.
Yes. I'm going to show my mismatched pants. Oh, there it is. That's the paperback.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I don't think it's fair that you come from such a talented family.
Yeah, it's nice. See there, yeah. I see a few people raising hands.
What? Raising hands?
Oh, maybe you can't see it. Maybe only
I can't do that. I don't have the power. What do they want to ask?
I don't know.
Tell them no.
Can you put? Can you comment in the chat?
Yes, comment in the chat or add your question to the Q&A instead of raising your hand, if that's all right, people. Okay, so
it works. Yeah.
Why don't you read that sort of beginning passage from the book, and then I'll ask you more pesky questions.
Okay, sounds good. So I thought I would read 2 pages. It's page 12 and 13. So the book starts the morning after Mel's high school graduation, when she and her brother Matt and her best friends Josie and Lara are driving back home. So they've spent the night at the cabin, you know, the party cabin kind of thing. And then they pass a murder scene. Okay, so that happens in chapter 1. Chapter 2. The morning before the day of my graduation, my mother slept until 11. I worried she wouldn't be ready in time for the ceremony in the high school gym, but then Matt went to her room, helped her get up and put on some clothes, and together they left the house. Through the front window, I watched them walk down the steep driveway, turn right towards the path to the beach. They walked slowly, my mother stopping every few steps while Matt talked. They didn't go far. Soon they were just standing on the side of the road, Matt clutching her arm as my mother held both hands over her face, then turned away, turned back, like she couldn't decide which direction to move. What were you talking about? I asked him later that night at the party, the two of us side by side on the dock, facing the lake. He stood there fidgeting, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, ripping the paper label off a bottle of Canadian. Tell me, I said, but he wouldn't. It had been his idea to escort us, to drive Lara and Josie and me out of town, past Copper Bridge, down the dirt road to the cabin on Lake Mattawa, and I was glad. He was my big city brother, into things nobody in Hickson River had ever heard of. The violent femmes, booze cans, protests at the US Embassy in Toronto, which he called the Grey Fortress of Imperialism. For 3 years, he'd been away at school, although it would take him 5 to graduate because he'd switched his major from biology to political science and seemed more focused on his volunteer job, escorting women through demonstrations at a downtown abortion clinic. Every spring, he came back north to work at the Ministry of Natural Resources, the job he started the summer after grade 13, the one he hated, still does. Part of me was relieved that Matt wasn't talking that night. I didn't really want to think about my family. Besides, it wasn't unusual, my being kept in the dark. Most of the time, it seemed my mother couldn't see me, that I wasn't much more than a shadow cast by Matt. He was bright, living color, the love of her life. So I turned away from his silence, wanting only that moment, the two of us standing on the dock, watching the sunset bleed into the deep neon blue of dusk, the stars blinking open like tiny watchful eyes. Josie and Lara plunking down the boards to join us. I looped my arms around their shoulders, one best friend on either side. It was a perfect time. before the night came on, before Todd picked up Lara and threw her in the lake, before the rest of us stripped down and waded out past a fringe of reeds and lily pads to swim, one girl screaming at the sight of a bloodsucker and running back on shore, forgetting she was naked. Before Charlie got so drunk he set fire to the dry yellow lawn, and we watched it smolder, sending up fat, noxious rolls of smoke, beers loose in our hands until somebody shouted fire, and we all looked around for a place to set our bottles down. It was nearly 3 a.m. before we got to bed, escaping the bugs and the stench of the grass, crisp to charcoal, to stumble into the cabin to sleep. I couldn't have known what would be waiting when I woke up, that I'd spent the night on the rapidly diminishing surface of my childhood, that last patch of solid ground.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I could seriously listen to you read for hours. Do you want to read for a few more hours? Just read like the first half. Just the first half of the book. Don't be so selfish. Okay, I have a question. This has nothing to do with you. Tell me the origins of the title. Where did that come from? It's an interesting title.
Yeah, it was, I was looking for a title. So a big inspiration for this book was Karen Joy Fowler's book, We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, which basically I read that novel and I dried my tears because I was crying at the end of it. And I went into my office and I started writing this book. That book just was such a profound influence on me. And so I wanted a title that sort of echoed that kind of phrasing, we are all completely beside ourselves. This has nothing to do with you. It's sort of a statement of, this is how things are. And then it came from the little piece in the book where Mel says, this has nothing to do with you. You're just the reader. What do you care about the book, kind of thing. And I think at that point when I wrote that, I thought, okay, that's the title. And so once I had that idea, I started thinking about its broader meaning thematically, because the book is so much about what is related to us, what isn't related to us, the whole witnessing Rwanda on the TV screen, and that whole societal push that, people saying it has nothing to do with us. It's a, tribal warfare. They were excusing it over and over again and not wanting to get involved. And so thematically,
I mean, and in some ways, can you hear me? I just got an unstable thing.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, yeah.
In some ways, that's what her family says to Mel. This has nothing to do with you. It's being kept outside of resonances, I think.
Okay, can you repeat that? You were just breaking up a little bit. Oh, Ariel.
Okay, I would say that in some ways, oh no, I'm gonna write it in the chat. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. In some ways, it's what her family says to Mel, that they sort of put her at a distance, that she doesn't get to know what's happening in her own family before and after the murders, right?
Yeah.
Like she doesn't get to know what's driving it, and yet she has to live it, but she doesn't get to know why.
Yeah, she doesn't get to know all that, and so much of the book, even at that very beginning, the excerpt that I just read, is her like, "What were you guys talking about?" Like she could see the seriousness of it. What were you talking about? And she asks that question, like over and over through the book, because that is one of the central moments, right, of the unfolding of the story. Yeah.
I mean, it almost makes it more unfair. You know what I mean? Like, it's all unfair. Everything that happens to Matt and to Mel is super unfair. It's not what they should have to deal with as young people, right? Just starting their lives. But at least Matt has all the information, you know? Yeah.
Anyways, and I mean, I think Matt is driven partly because he wants to protect her, you know, he wants to keep her safe, sort of keep her in her silence, and also not really admit his part in it, of course. Getting very close to spoiler alerts here.
I know. I mean, in some ways, we won't go any further. We'll just be intriguing and mysterious. But I'm an eldest child, and my parents divorced or separated when I was 19. And in the year after they split, I sort of acted as a confidant for both of them, which was a mistake. I had no way of being able to help them or figure out how to process what they were telling me. Like, it was the worst idea. But I thought I was helping. But it was that same thing, right? Like, I can help my parents get through this thing. Even the smallest thing, like a separation. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Matt and his mother are even closer than that, because they both care about the world. They both care about the broader reality outside of this little town. And so they share that. Yeah. It's almost like them against
the world.
You know, the father's sort of desire to be ignorant of everything, and, you know, Mel kind of living her child's life. So, yeah.
So this is another Sue Sorensen question. It's so good to have access to her brain. This novel is set in the 1990s. How much research did you have to do to remind yourself about the culture and politics of the time? We were just talking about the Rwandan genocide, right? And was it fun to do this question? I noticed that you did a playlist, right? And so that's part and parcel of that research. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love that part. Just trying to figure out, like, I remember once on Facebook, I asked people about pagers. Like, okay, let's talk about pagers, because, or did anyone have a cell phone? Because I was trying to figure out the things about phones and what people needed in terms of technology. So there was that. I had to do a little bit of finagling about the scanner, because Mel's job is to scan all those old articles. And so if you notice in the book, it's that scanner, cutting edge piece of equipment, has been donated by, you know, some professor at the university kind of thing, because it had to be very special because it was a bit early. Yeah. The Rwanda stuff was super interesting because that is such a big part of the book, that I had 2 calendars side by side from that time that I printed off the internet. So April into May 1994, and I had the events of the plot and what was happening in Rwanda at the time, so that I would know exactly what Matt was seeing on the TV. Yeah. And I went to CBC in Toronto one time when I was home, and I went into a screening room and I screened a lot of the old news segments about it, so that I could get little details like color of Mansbridge's tie, I think, is mentioned on one of them, or just stuff like, because it was tricky, right? Nobody was in the country at the time. There weren't any images coming out of Rwanda because, you know, it was pre-cell phone. So I wanted to see exactly what the news was showing, and often it was maps with reporters at the border, you know, reporting from there. So that was really cool to do that. Yeah, and then the prison stuff, I did a bunch of research into the prison situation at the Kingston prison for women, because what happens with her mom is based on an actual event that happened there that they had an inquest into. And so I weirdly, when I did my writer-in-residence gig in Calgary, a lot of that material was at the Calgary Library.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it was so bizarre.
It's funny where all that material winds up, right? Like
Yeah.
archives hold different pieces that don't even necessarily have anything to do with where they are, or like they just
That was just really weird because it was an Ontario prison, it was an Ontario situation, but they had a full copy of the inquest report at the Calgary Library, which was
amazing.
like a 5-minute walk from where I was staying. So it was so weird. So I didn't end up using as much of that as I thought I would, but because I pulled back a little bit. There was a lot more in an earlier draft about the prison.
Can I ask you a bit about your process? I'm curious, right? This is your second novel, your fourth book, your fourth published book. I'm sure you've written more books than you've published, like all of us.
Yeah.
But how did your process change for this book? Was it easier or harder than Swarm, or is every book a new book in your opinion in terms of process?
Well, every book is definitely a new book. In some ways it was easier than Swarm because I had a better handle on how plot operates. So that was easier. Like what Swarm was really, because it was also my master's thesis, so I was writing it with Susan Swan, like kind of in consultation with her. And so that book was plot boot camp because she really pushed me a lot on plot, which was great.
And she's really tall. I like that about her.
Very tall. And her daughter is my agent, and she's also very tall. They're both very tall women, which is amazing. So, yeah. What was I saying?
Process. I interrupted you. How many drafts did you do of this one?
I don't even know. Like maybe 8, maybe.
Over how many years?
I started it in 2014, I think.
Yeah.
So over 4 years. Was that 4 years? 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, and you were also writing your book of poetry during that time.
Yeah, the book of poetry I actually took about 10 years. I started it in 2008. With a lot of those poems about ancestry. Yeah, so, but I was going back and forth. Like I did Sage Hill for the poetry book, so I spent a lot of focus time on that. And then I would basically finish a draft of the novel, put it aside for a bit, work on some poetry, read the draft, figure out what I needed to do next. Oh my God, I'm getting exhausted just thinking about it.
What was it like launching 2 books in the same year?
That never again. But at least I'm so lucky, because if it was starting now, it'd be, I do feel lucky about that. Yeah.
So what are you working on now? I mean, really, what aren't you working on now? But what literary work are you doing now?
I'm working on a poetry collection about my brother, which is pretty tough. So that's an aspect of this book too, right? Like, because while I was writing this book, I had 2 people close to me die, one of them being my brother. So the book is dedicated to him. So I'm working on a poetry collection about Tim. And I wrote a novel, but I think I'm not going to go further with it. It's a short novel, so I don't know what I'm working on. I've written a scene twice in the last couple weeks, which has really captivated me, and I think it might be a beginning scene of something. So that's hopeful. But I'm so, like, I've written so many novels that die, or just I lose interest. Or
how many?
Well, I wrote one between Swarm and this, which I wrote probably 5 drafts of, called Hidden River, which I love the title. The title's so great.
Let's say it a few more times just so it gets aired. Oh, I hear you have a book named Hidden River.
So I was thinking about maybe taking another look at that. I don't know what I'm doing. Really, what I think I need to do is just chill for a while.
Yeah.
I think I'm really exhausted and I need to just read and kick back.
Well, and it's one thing to keep busy during a pandemic, and it's another thing to run yourself ragged in public.
Yeah, which has sort of been what it's caught up to me a little bit. So I'm really glad to have done this. It's felt so meaningful and great, but I'm also glad that it's coming to an end for a while.
Well, and I know that I, as someone that organized a launch through the pandemic series, was so grateful to have a space and such a brilliant organizer helping out with that. And, you know, it's really sad to have a book come out and to not have any of the launches and events and things you spend years dreaming of, right?
Yeah. And that whole thing was just driven by that, imagining how painful that would be. Like, I could imagine how, and maybe it's because I was fresh off 2 books out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because wow.
Speaking of which, the Manitoba Book Awards, there was no ceremony this year. There was no party. They did a really good job promoting the shortlist and then just releasing the winners.
Yeah.
But, you know, did you have an outfit you were planning to wear at the ceremony? And could you go put it on now and prance around?
No, I didn't even. I don't know. You know, I think
I heard him that time.
Yeah. I think I kind of wasn't letting myself think of it that way.
Yeah.
You know, because I was, you know how like you get nodded at for so many awards, and I just thought, you know, you're not gonna, you know what I mean? That morning was a shocker. I called my mom immediately, and and it was just amazing to be able to have that news. So no, I didn't even have an outfit. I think we knew pretty early on, right? That
yeah, but it's still the way our community comes together.
Yeah. Well, part of it too is that I'm so new down here.
Yeah.
There was that too, and I didn't go last year. I think I had another commitment or something. I didn't go last year. Or no, wasn't last year. It was all we won't get into that, but
yeah. It's a way we come together, but it's also hard because, you know, the reality is if you get nominated for your books, you might not win. And I have friends every year that like don't get nominated for things. Excellent books, beautiful books, and don't get nominated.
Yeah.
And that's hard. But it's also excellent to be recognized.
Yeah.
And I hope you put the money into raised garden beds and additional trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. It was, and it feels amazing. Like, it feels like, you know, I just felt like part of me was like, finally. Part of me was, I did have that reaction a bit.
Well, and of course you got the John Hirsch Award for Most Promising Manitoba Writer. I would argue that you've not only been promising, but delivering on that promise for years already. But it's still very nice to be recognized by your community and to get that sort of like check.
Totally.
Seal of approval.
It's amazing. Yeah, amazing. And I mean, it's means so much to me. I don't feel like I have ever had a writing community like I have here. Like never. I mean, I just this writing community and is just so important to me. Like you and Erna and Sue and Sally and Donna and so many other people that I'm not even mentioning because I can't think of everyone.
Yes.
But Marge and Charlene
and Bob writing from Fort Lauderdale as he does.
And Bob and it's really valuable. It's hugely valuable. And I really appreciate it, you know, because I have not ever had it. And I lived up in the Pas for so long. And even then, like you sent me a message. We like reached out to me through Facebook. I was this stranger up in northern Manitoba, and
I think I had a bit of a lit crush on you, and you came down to do Speaking Crow, and I was like, hello, my name is Ariel, who are you? Or how are you? And you were so nice. It was good.
I remember that.
Yeah. Okay, so should we do another reading?
Yes.
Or should, we've been going for about an hour, but let's do another reading, and then, but first I want to ask you one more question because I'm so curious. Explorations of grief and family really seem to drive your writing. So
yes,
I have this idea that writers work through ideas or places that they're kind of not stuck, but places that they have a lot of interest and experience. There are these little moments, and they explore them in book after book in different ways and in different means. So the books are not the same, but they explore them until they sort of figure them out, and then they move to the next set of ideas. So tell me about you and family and grief. And I'm not asking you to divulge your own history, but it's such an interesting part of your writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've through my life, I've had a lot of loss. Like, a big, huge moment for my family was my mom and my brother's car accident, right? Head-on collision, Northern Ontario. She broke every bone, I think, except one in her body. Couldn't work anymore. That's why she started painting. My brother was in that accident too. And, banged his head up, broke his leg. Like, it was like, are they going to survive, right? My sister and I were on our own, kind of with my aunt. My dad was traveling around trying to help. And so that was a big marker. And that happened when I was 8. And it was shortly before that my grandmother, who I was very close to, had died. So just a lot of loss, right, in my life. And yeah, I think it is something that I keep looking at, keep exploring. And of course, not having children, that whole loss, wanting children, not having children, which of course I explored in Following C. Yeah, and I think also living, I think landscape has a lot to do with that as well. Like, I grew up in this small town, in remote town, Northern Ontario, where it's just the mood of that place is so silent and quiet and reflective and open, and yeah, I think that is kind of infused into that as well.
I think this is a perfect time for you to read.
Okay.
Do that beautiful reading that we talked about.
Okay, so page 269.
If you're reading along, if you've got the book there, page 269.
Jason thought that was funny. Not sure why.
I did a launch of a poetry anthology, Yvonne Blomer's book, and so everybody was like, "What page? What page?" And then people were shouting it out in the comments. It was hilarious. But so I thought I'd satisfy that for people that were reading it.
So this is this part. Mel is taken off to go out to Sophie. So Sophie is the woman who has kind of taken in Gromit to help him, to train him, when Mel realizes she just can't do it for a little while. So what else do you need to know? But she's also starting to uncover some things. So I hit the road. It's what I need right now to take off, to get out of Dodge. With my foot heavy on the gas, the car speeds out onto the highway, threading through the tall rock cuts, soaring over the moonlike landscape that's been stripped bare by acid rain. Devoid of vegetation, the small lakes to the east, clear as glass and empty of fish, sterile, without complications, without life. I'm thinking I'll skip Sophie's, maybe go see Jose, but then I start fantasizing about truly running away, blowing past Limberlost Lane, right through Hickson River, heading to the Sioux to cross into the States, driving south, 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 then west to find my way back to Arizona, to Robert. Deep down, I know what that is, a step into a past I'm already done with, where I realize I won't actually fit anymore. A wave of grief hits me, and all of a sudden I'm crying so hard I have to pull over, and it's just like the days and months afterwards when my eyes would skim over a picture of my parents and I'd think, no, just that, but all capitals, no. No is back in my mind again, but this time about Matt, about how I seem to be losing him and what can I do? I sit there, my face in my hands, until a tap on my door makes me jump. Through a smudge on the glass from Gromit's eager nose, I see that it's a cop. Everything okay? He asks as I roll down the window. My dad died, I tell him. He takes a step back, subtle, that slight familiar recoil, and I see his face start to calculate the questions. A long time ago, I blurt. He had a heart attack, I lie, so I won't have to get into details, use the name of it, alarm him, murder. Oh, he says, I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I wipe my nose on the cuff of my sleeve. He looks behind me. A transport could come flying around this curve, he says, offering care. Better pull up a ways, or better yet, find a coffee shop, get yourself off the road. Thanks, I mutter, and he nods. As I shift into drive, he stands there, watching as I go on my way. I don't want to do this. See Sophie, collect my dog, sneak him back into my apartment building like the past few days haven't happened. But in Massey, my trembling hand hits the blinker and I turn onto Limberlost Lane. Before long, I'm at the top of the hill, looking down at the farmhouse. In the yard, my car door opens into a storm of barking dogs, Gromit muscling through to reach me. He growls a couple times to assert his claim, then leaps up, paws on my shoulders, and licks my face until it's soaked. Off! Sophie booms from the veranda. Immediately, he drops away. You spoil him, she says, walking closer. She's wearing an orange vest over a pink shirt, the colors clashing so aggressively I have to glance away. You can't do that. It'll only make things worse. Wet things. Resource guarding, jealousy. She looks over at him. He's panting happily, leaning against my leg, but when her gaze shifts, it's me she sees. My eyes red and puffy, I imagine, the skin splotchy around my mouth. The way she peers at me makes me feel like nobody's fully taken me in, not really, not for years, and the tears start pooling again. I can barely see as she takes my arm and leads me to the veranda, to a church pew sitting against the wall of the house. Take these two in there, Sophie says to Ted, who's standing on the other side of the screen door. He doesn't say a word as he leads in the greyhound, who's limping, I notice, and Trotsky. When Sophie's weight settles beside me on the bench, the only dog left is Gromit, lying on the planks, and I nudge his back paw with my foot, trying to regain my composure, staring down at Sophie's rubber boots, which are dusty like a wiped down chalkboard. I need to blow my nose, and I wish I had a box of tissues or a hanky like the ones my dad used when I was a kid that he'd pull out of his pocket that I'd give back to him sopping wet. When was that? When did I cry in front of him? When had he offered such care? Matt, she says. I nod. When I can speak, I say, why didn't you tell me? She sighs. Which part? I look at her. What's that mean? All of it, all the stuff I know now. It wasn't my place. He told me not to, and he's your brother. So? So I figured he knew best. Anger, I feel, at Matt, his control. Sophie's looking down at Gromit, at how he's resting his chin on my foot so he'll know if I try to leave. Protecting you, she says, and for a second I'm not sure if she means my dog or Matt, believing he's still in charge, still the mediator, still the one who can make things easier for me, his little Midge. Well, you can tell me now, I say, your version, how it happened, and about Celia, I start, but my voice won't work. I know it. I push a knuckle against my lip and swallow her name, but Sophie doesn't seem to notice, is wiping her hands on her knees like she's getting ready to start a difficult task, stand up and go dig a trench or unspool a roll of chicken wire. All right, she says, and she starts to talk.
That was lovely.
Thank you.
All right. So I am thinking that it might be time for other people to have a chance to ask you questions.
Yes.
So I am going to sort of sink down, and I'm going to invite John back up to ask you questions
Sure.
from the crowd. If you have any other questions, add them to the Q&A. But thank you so much for being here, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And Lauren, you're so good.
Oh, thank you.
Mwah,
You're
mwah.
good too. Read her book, Treat. Oh, she's gone. Hi, John.
Hello, Lauren. Well, Ariel did leave a very dramatic picture behind, so at least we have that.
Yes.
So I will just again encourage everybody, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A screen. There are a few questions there already, so I'll read some of those off, particularly any incredibly clinical questions about the revision process. Lauren would love to answer them.
Yeah, those are great.
So we'll start off with a question from Magdalene Redekop, who asks, given that we are all each other's consequences and other people are in our own skin, why did you choose to write this novel from a first-person point of view?
First person is always how I enter story, I think. It's really helpful for me to occupy a character, to sink into a character's skin. So that is just, it's my most natural form. I find third person really, really difficult and hard. So yeah, just Mel came to be. I'd actually written a couple of short stories with her as a first-person narrator as well. So she was already kind of in existence. So yeah, she just came, and the story I wanted to be explored through her.
Excellent. Leanne Fournier asks, how important are secondary characters like Gromit in helping to tell stories?
Huge. That cast of characters is really significant because it shows who Mel is, all of her interactions with all these other people, especially in first person, because that's how we understand the terrain and the world is through her interactions with people. So they are really important. Yeah.
Cheryl Sadowski has not a question, but a comment. So if you would like to comment on the comment, you are welcome to do so. I just love Lauren's comment about writing about people who are buffeted. That's so interesting. It's the stuff of great stories. Who wants to read about the flatlands? People who are tossed about, who are conflicted, have dualities. I want to know these people in novels and real life. I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak a little bit more about that, or if you were content with cutting that six.
Absolutely. Because I think, no matter where we come from and what our challenges are, those are the sort of universal truths that we can get at through fiction, and understand and have compassion for people who are so different from us. And yet we face these similar things like grief, like losing people we love, like, yeah, I love that. That's a beautiful passage too that Cheryl wrote.
Well, Bob asked what button he uses to download the wine, as he is new to Zoom, and I would just chalk that up to poor planning on your part, Bob.
What did he ask? Sorry.
He asked which button he uses to download the wine, so that might be something to keep in mind for the next other response series.
Yeah.
So let's see. Oh, and we seem to have reached the end of our, oh wait. Angeline Schellenberg was curious. What reason did that other publisher, who shall go unnamed, give for wanting to delete the whole BC US adventure portion of the novel?
Yeah, let me try and remember. I think she felt that the story just moved too much. I don't think she liked it may have been just personal preference, but I think she didn't like the movement back and forth as much. And often, you know, those sorts of books I think are challenging for people who are putting themselves behind marketing more, like big publishers, because there's always a situation where, you know, a reader likes one storyline better than the other. And so it can be a less simple book to sell, I think. I'm not sure. I can't remember, honestly. It was like 4 years ago. So, but it was pretty disappointing that, like, with both my novels, I've had interest from bigger publishers that just hasn't come to fruition. But I am really starting to understand and realize, the more I'm in the writing community and the more I'm working with independent publishers, how incredibly valuable and important they are, and supportive. I think way more than a lot of the bigger publishers. I hear some complaints from colleagues sometimes who are working with big publishers and just don't have the heft behind them for promotion and getting their work out there. And I just think the dedication of independent publishers is huge and important. And so I feel really valuable. And I think Freehand, I loved working with Freehand. They did a fantastic job. The cover, the editorial work with Naomi Lewis. She was the editor on this book, and it was amazing working with her. She's so sharp and smart. So yeah, it was a real pleasure working with them. Yeah.
Always admired Freehand's ability to keep their seasons very lean, just picking those 3 books or so and then just throwing all their focus behind that. And I really admired that about them.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a really great press.
Cheryl has a follow-up in which she mentions that she loves the statement of yours, writing about people who are buffeted. But she also had a follow-up question. How do you find the endurance to write a novel? How do you stick with the story and characters? And are you able to work on other stories in between? Or does that distract you from the big project?
Yeah, no, I can't work on other stories. I can work on poetry, but it needs to be just the one novel. And to be honest, I'm trying to remember. And I think with every book, you have to remember how to write a novel. It has to be a story, and it has to be characters that really mean a lot and that really are alive and remain alive too. And right now I feel like I'm hunting for those characters, and I feel like I have little bits and pieces of them that are finally starting to come, but who knows, maybe they'll all disappear. But I think that that's one of the most important things, is that it's alive, that the people are alive. And Mel in this book is so alive for me. She just right through, just ferociously alive, which was a real pleasure. I got to the point where I just loved hanging out with her. So that was such a gift. And I hope I can get that back. I hope I can find that again.
Well, it comes across in the reading too. There's so much electricity and so much dynamism to her as a character too, that your passion for her really comes across in that way.
Yeah. She just became so real. Like I had a couple of dreams about her even. in the process. Yeah.
So it seems like things are winding down slightly. I think we've reached the end of our questions, and it seems like a few people are slowly going away while sending their best as well at this point. So I wasn't sure if there was anything more you had wanted to say at this point.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody so much for coming and for helping out with this series too. John, you've done at least one other event and helped support it and help with promotion. And Ariel, of course, has helped with a few and definitely getting the word out. So I just feel like in a lot of ways it's been a community effort with the donations. They've been all really helpful, especially to pay the costs for Zoom, for running webinars and things like that, and you know, compensating a little bit of the work that I've put in. But yeah, it's been a fantastic spring, and I'm planning to do some more next spring or next fall, this fall coming up. Not as many, not one every week, sometimes two. That was a little crazy. So maybe one, maybe two a month. And yeah, I just really appreciate everyone coming out to this and all the other readings. And they're all archived too. Like the recordings are all at the bottom of the PRRS page if you want to go back and view any or see any that you missed. That's where they live now. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And just being somebody who's even been peripherally involved in a few, huge thanks to you for all your work and everything that you've done to showcase the writing community here and abroad as well. It's been such a pleasure to be a part of this, however tangentially. So
yeah,
enormous thanks to you, Lauren. And thanks to everybody else for joining us as well, even grudgingly, Ariel.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all. And it's the awkward end part. Here we are right through the series. It's always been like we reach the end and it's like, okay, what happens now? At Sarah's launch, we ended up having a spontaneous encore. Yeah, because there were still 40 people near the end, and they all started taking over the chat. Encore, encore. Oh, it was hilarious. It was so funny. So she read another poem. It was great.
Will
and
you
that's in the video.
Else? Will you read something else to see us out? Please?
No. I taught a 3 hour. Oh, I wanted to talk about this book, this Secret History, which was.
Oh,
this
do
is
it.
a good book.
It's a good book.
So good. I'm gonna reread it, I think. But the murder is right at the beginning, so I remember the visceral experience of reading this book and thinking, I want to write a book where there's a murder at the beginning. So yeah, that was a good contributing factor. Also the dialogue in there. I'm teaching a course tomorrow on dialogue, and the dialogue book is.
So you taught today for 3 hours, did this launch, and then you're teaching tomorrow?
Yeah.
I thought you said there was resting happening.
Well, tomorrow I teach, and then I have one more class in this class I'm teaching next week. And then I got Jane Eyre out of the library because I'm rereading Wide Sargasso Sea, which is such a good book. And then I'm going to read Jane Eyre again. And yeah.
There's 2 more questions in the chat, and your mother even asked you a question.
He did?
You want me to read it? I'm taking your role, John.
Oh, I failed. I'm so sorry.
Will you write, your mother says, will you write novels beyond the area of Northern Ontario, since you have been in Manitoba now for a number of years?
Yes, the new book that I am, circling around, is set in Winnipeg.
Oh.
Yeah. So yes, Mom.
Just a suggestion, one artist to another.
Yeah, it has, really haunted me, that area, but I'm starting, because I've been here for so long, I'm starting to, how long have I been here now? 8 years?
Has it been that long?
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
Also, my aunt said where the hike started.
Yes.
Omaha, Nebraska is where this book starts. This is a great book too. It's so fun to read this book because it's like hanging out with my uncle.
Is it still in print?
I don't know. My aunt would know that.
Put it up on the screen again. I want to see.
If you're still here, Aunt Linda.
You're moving too much.
Right.
Clive Scott Chisholm.
Yes.
That's
so his birth name was Clive Chisholm, and then he moved to the States, and they all called him Scotty because of his Scottish heritage, and so that became his name.
Oh.
Everyone in the States knew him as Scott, but his name is Clive. So.
Huh.
The other weird thing about this book,
Scottishness?
Pardon?
Was it that obvious, his Scottishness?
I guess, or knowing my uncle, he probably told elaborate and large stories about his Scottishness. So the other crazy thing about this book is that, so Jason, when we met, we discovered that his great-great-grandfather was a missionary in the very small church that my family was baptized into. And so we figured out that his great-great-grandfather had probably baptized my great-great-grandmother into this church. And there's a part in this book where the page is facing, on the one hand, they're talking about Jason's famous great-great-grandfather, the missionary guy, and then talking about my great-great-grandmother coming into this church and they're facing pages. Very weird.
So it was ordained that you would get together through the generations.
Absolutely it was.
My partner and I we figured out years after the fact that we were at the same daycare when we were 3. Oh. And he likes to say that I pulled his pants down. I was the one that pulled his pants down, but I wasn't, because I was not that kind of kid.
Ariel,
very shy.
You were okay. I'm with Mike on that one. I'm leaning towards his side.
Anyone's gonna pants someone.
You still try to pull people's pants down.
Don't give ideas. Yeah.
This part I'll edit out. Either that or I'll do a little outtake.
Your aunt is asking about the question.
Yes. Is Uncle Clive's book still in print?
Is it still available?
Bison Books. This is University of Nebraska Press.
Okay. It should be in print then.
Yeah, print on demand, she said.
Yeah. Yeah, they do that often for backlist, so.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. All right,
everyone.
You look like you're in prison. You look like the bars of your cell are shining on your face, and this is the hour of sunlight you get once a day.
I'm a very pale man. This is all I can handle.
Did someone shave your head in quarantine?
I shave my head in quarantine, as it is the laziest thing to maintain.
What if it doesn't grow back?
It's actually added some hair to my bald spot, so I'm viewing this as a success.
Now that we've commented on each other's appearances.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been an excellent night.
Good night.
Good night. See you.
Bye.